3, 2, 1. Mary MacCarthy here with the Data Tea live from right next to the DBT conference. I actually had to go back to my hotel. I wanted to do this Data Tea from the showroom at DBT Coalesce happening at the Hyatt in New Orleans. Internet speeds weren't exactly what I wanted, so I'm doing it from my hotel room. And in the true spirit of DBT Coalesce, which makes an effort to really bring in people who are on site and also in other cities, I'm joined by a guest who was here early in the week, and now she's off doing her thing in San Francisco, Sarah Krasnik. Sarah, I've wanted you on for so long. Welcome to the Data Tea.
Thank you so much, Mary. It's really awesome to be here.
Yes, and just so people know, I've been accused of having a bias of only bringing people on the show who have good hair. I truly do not make that a criteria, I swear, but it is kind of like looking in the mirror, you know, to give myself a compliment. Nice looking back at the big hair, Sarah. So besides having good hair, what else should we know about you?
Thank you. I appreciate the shout out. And for anyone who has curly hair, natural is totally the way. Anyway,
we'll talk about that off air.
Anyway, so a little
bit I thought that was a product. I thought natural was a product. Natural is in lowercase n.
Yeah, not the product. Just like, you know, embrace yourself, and we'll be talking about that a little bit later. You know, in the pod as well. But so my background is in I would say like broader analytics. I've held data scientist, analyst, I would say for most of the time, data engineering titles, and have worked very closely with product teams, with marketing teams, and really enjoy kind of bridging the gap between engineering and the business with like analytics and data somewhere in the middle. I was most recently leading the data engineering team at Perpe, which is a fintech startup in the Philly area, which is where I am based currently. But for the last 7 months or so, have been consulting both on go-to-market for vendors, as well as kind of the analytics, more traditional analytics consulting, and kind of working on a few projects.
Okay, living the high life, the data consultant, the data influencer, all of that. As part of that, you did come to Coalesce this week. I think you were here Monday and Tuesday. So what was your take? Was that your first DBT Coalesce conference?
Yeah, so I mean, like a lot of people, I attended virtually the past couple of years. Was really excited when this year was actually happening, and so knew that like I could not miss it. And I'd say there are a few things that come to mind. The first is people. Like, people are awesome. I think the community is really special. I think Tristan mentioned that in his keynote, but really it's like everyone is so nice, and no matter what is going on in the general market, it's so great to talk to people with a variety of different backgrounds, put faces to names, which I think a lot of us were doing in this conference. And for me, like, that was the absolute most positive takeaway. So the community is awesome. I would say in general, what we see is, right, even talking to kind of operators who came, and everyone under their title of either analytics engineer or analyst or BI engineer or whatever it may be, it's very clear that analytics is becoming more top of mind for so many more organizations. That is evidenced by just like the number of people that attended the conference, which I think is absolutely fantastic, because analytics and data has to be it has to be top of mind when implementing a product, when you know, building the organization, and it shouldn't be an afterthought of where data has to fit. There is also I found this trend of like codifying context throughout the conference, even the couple days that I was there, and the sessions that I kind of listened to virtually over the last couple days. Context is really important. There were a few talks around this, around the context of data, and how do you actually take insights and take information and actually drive action with the context of both the organization and what's needed, whether that be the announcement of the semantic layer and metrics, and exposing data in a way that is very consumable by a variety of different stakeholders. But really, I think there's this broader trend of, okay, so now we have a lot of tooling, right? We have a lot of process, but how do we actually act on that? Which I think is really fantastic. And I think it's it speaks to the evolution of the analytics organization as a whole. The last thing,
go for it. Yeah. No, keywords that I'm hearing too. So I'm taking it all in: knowledge, context, communication. So yeah.
And the last thing that I wanted to kind of comment on is the integrations piece. I think with so many different vendors in the space, they all have to work together. And while it is great to see so many vendors working together and making it easier for practitioners to use tools together, I would say there's a lot more to that when it comes to actually operationalizing it. And the one thing that I'll throw out there is really cost control. I think there haven't been there was a little bit on kind of query efficiency, but there hasn't been much talk about, how do you understand where, if you as a data team have a budget, where should that budget go? And how do you, mitigate any issues with that budget growing linearly with the size of the organization, or exponentially in the worst case, the size of the organization? So I think practically when it comes to actually using metrics, using all these tools, integrating everything together, right? Do we stream or do we do batch? How do we do that? Like there's so many decisions to be made, but it also comes down to budget. And I would love to see kind of people's, response to that and more conversations there as well.
And that, my friends, is the 2-minute white paper summary given verbally by Sarah Krasnik, summarizing what's happening at Coalesce. And I think you really get at the fact that a lot of the happier, productive conversations are happening live because people are together, and there's that synergy, to use a corporate term, happening about whether it's about integrations, collaboration, communication within orgs and across orgs with each other, and then in the tools that we're selling. But those maybe broader economic questions that affect everybody are certainly not what we're talking about this week, because a lot of those are things that maybe bring into question the work that we're all doing as well. So that's certainly not been the focus here, but valid questions that we have to think about. And that kind of brings me to ask you this, whether it's, say, at the type of interactions that you see within the DBT community here in New Orleans or in Slack, or just in general, I have this critique of the modern data stack that others have as well, that there is some inward lookingness, maybe insularness. Is that something that you feel is a limitation in terms of how we interact? And, I guess ultimately we're all here to push our own work, right? Is it too inward facing?
I would also have that critique that I do think it's inward facing. I think there are two things. The first is you have to build a community around the things that you're passionate about. And I think that can happen in any community. So I actually don't think it's a critique of like specifically the modern data stack community, frankly, as much as I hate that term and try not to use it.
Right.
But I definitely do think it's inward facing. And I think sometimes we all have to take a step back and also assess who are the people not using DBT. And a lot of them will eventually be using DBT. Like, I think that we're all in agreement there. The question is, what does that migration look like from both an effort perspective, from a cost perspective, even people who, when Hadoop was a thing, and there's still companies still using Hadoop. I have fairly recently, just a few years ago, worked at one of them. And so they're still using that technology. And the question is, well, if we think technology is moving in a more forward direction, how do we actually make that migration easier for people that are using legacy tools to continue moving forward? And that tail of adoption, we need to get those people right forward and figuring out what does it look like. This is something that like I work with vendors a lot on, is if they're using a previous version or a different tool, to get customers on a platform and using a tool, you have to make it as easy as humanly possible for them to adopt the tool. And I think that we, as a community, aren't focusing enough on what that migration looks like, and both from a cost and people perspective and how long it can take, not at a 50-person org, but like at a 10,000-person org.
Well, that's a great segue to your newsletter. So you have a newsletter, Sarah's newsletter, great name, a Substack, in which you take on some of these questions. What was your goal when you start the newsletter? And for people who haven't read it, give us a sense of what it is.
Absolutely. My whole goal with the newsletter is I want to start conversations. I think it's boring when people agree. And so I want to hear, right, I have thoughts, and I actually hate being inward looking myself. I don't want to live in my own world. I want to put content out there. And these are thoughts that I stand behind. I want to hear people who disagree. I want to hear people who have different perspectives, because I think the way that, in my opinion, we grow as people, as professionals most, is when we are exposed to different opinions. So my whole goal with this newsletter is to digest, I think, technical content, maybe complex content in a way that I'm trying to make more accessible, and then figure out, right, where can we all be better? So at a very high level, that's the point of the newsletter.
So was your initial article or blog that came out launching the newsletter, was that the minimal viable data stack? Was that the one where you sort of said, let's do away with the modern data stack term and call it remind me the term, minimum viable
stack?
The
minimum viable data stack. I think actually that might have been the second article. The first article was actually maybe potentially the least controversial, which was data storage. It was something like data storage matters or something like that. And it was really about like how we need to be thinking about the tools around how we store data, and it's going to be different in a variety of different contexts. And to me, that actually speaks to context is important, whether it's data and insights or how we choose tools. The context of the organization, who the people are, what the existing tooling is, what the problems that we're trying to solve are. It's all very important.
Okay, so I want to ask you about your latest article, which was on product analytics. But before that, just to give a bit of context, I want to know a bit more about your career journey. So you've, like a lot of data people, it seems like you've done it all and can do it all in terms of analyst, data scientist, data engineer. Is that right?
I have done it all. Whether I can do it all, I'll leave that.
Or whether you want to do it all. That's maybe the question.
to say. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people in the data field, and actually one of the reasons why I love working in the data field and with the people that were at Coalesce is I don't have a very traditional journey. And I think that's actually the thing that's, that a lot of us have in common, where we're very driven by curiosity and by efficiency. And that's kind of my whole MO. And yeah, so my career journey, graduated with a math and cognitive science major. The TLDR in cognitive science, it was really taking some computation classes, some comp sci classes, as well as linguistics classes, and really like language, and there was this intersection with NLP. So that's really how I landed into data science. It was very accidental. I think that was the case for many of us. And
absolutely,
data science, you need clean data. I discovered that very, very quickly. So that's really how I went into data engineering, but took a little bit of a turn into sales and customer success, which I'm happy to go into. But yeah, very nonlinear.
Got it. Amazing. And in I don't know if you consider yourself as having a specialty in product analytics, but you know a lot about it because your latest piece was fantastic in terms of taking this thing that we talk about and really breaking down the terminology really well. So I want to walk through your kind of take on product analytics. The most simple, I know now it's, people say, explain it like I'm 5. I say, explain it like we're in 7th grade. We don't need to explain like I'm 5, but what's the middle school version of what product analytics are?
Yeah, and I'm actually glad that you asked this, because this is actually the most pushback that I got in the article, which is, this isn't product analytics, or this isn't tracking, and you shouldn't compare all these tools. But to me, like, we kind of have to draw comparisons, right? They have to happen. So anyway, with product analytics, to me, it's everything that goes into understanding the performance of a user experience of a particular product. So this is everything from what data do we need to track the product? How is it going to be generated? How is it going to be used? Who's going to be using it? And then how do we actually understand it? What are the insights that we can draw from it? And then, right, on the most business side of things, how does it actually change our behavior, or how do we actually make decisions on this, information, or add context to this information to make decisions? And so really it's everything in between, which is also why it's so ambiguous. And
you say in most contexts, it comes down to a type of front-end tracking, right?
Yes, I think so.
And companies are trying. I should have told you to reread your article before you came on air. So companies are tracking what with their front-end tracking, and how are they studying that, or what ideally should they be doing?
Yeah. So with tracking, right, you want to, in general, product analytics, you're trying to understand, so people that visit your site compared to people that perform some sort of action that is meaningful to the business, because it either drives adoption or revenue or whatever, the metric is going to be different for you know, whether you're B2B, B2C, whether you're open source or not. But the point is that you're trying to measure where are people dropping off here and where can we improve the product to really, right, we have the number of people visiting, and then how are we going to, you know, optimize what they're doing on our platform. Now, to track that, right, you could track page views, button clicks, and really what you're tracking is what you're trying to get at is what are the drop-off points. When you implement that, there's so many different things that you have to keep in mind. And that's actually what's also difficult about product analytics, because there's so many stakeholders. So when you implement tracking, to me, that's the start. That's the data generation, the data collection, right? Generally, that is, or a lot of the time, that's implemented by engineering teams because they own the actual application when it comes to, you know, after the marketing site. Now, after that, you have to figure out, well, okay, where is this data going to live? How are we going to QA it? Is it right? And then it comes to, right, product actually analyzing it. And then it's about, well, how do we expose it to product teams and to marketing teams and to basically a variety of stakeholders to actually look at that information. So when it comes to implementing tracking analytics, to me, it's a lot more than just data generation. There's like a whole slew of things that have to happen afterwards as well.
So there's a complexity in terms of not just the tooling, but the teams involved, and maybe make greater complexity in terms of who does what with the teams. You went pretty deep on the tooling in your article. One thing I want to point out you do really well is not everyone does who writes these types of articles is you declare your editorial independence. You're not being paid by any of the vendors. It's fine when people are, but it's good to state that. And you kind of reviewed some of the tools that people use for this. Not the only tools, but some people use what are called CDPs, customer data platforms. What is a customer data platform for people who don't know?
Yeah, I'm all about like giving context and prefacing things that I say. And the first thing that I'll say is I actually hate the term because frankly, it's really ambiguous, and I probably don't even know what a CDP is. And so
data people, it's not something they like to talk about a whole lot, right?
Yeah, and so CDP, customer data platform. We like to call so many different things a platform. And customer data to me comes down to the tracking analytics. So this is a CDP is all of the tooling behind product analytics. And so whether it's one platform, like I think Segment is, is an example. It's one that I've used before of data collection. You're also routing data to different targets, whether it's clicks on your website that go to your marketing tool so you can, trigger some campaign off of it, whether it's just going straight to your warehouse. I think really it's about like, what is the tooling of how we look at customer data is even extremely vague, but it's how do we look at how users and potential customers and current customers are interacting in our product? How are we looking at that data? How are we collecting it? And how are we drawing insights on it? And even that definition is probably terrible to a certain extent because it's extremely vague.
What would you say in companies now? That was perfectly vague. Vague is fine. And I'm going to ask you a vague question, so answer it any way you want. But the typical pain points you're seeing with companies trying to do this front end tracking for product analytics, whether it's tooling or teams or all of it?
Yeah, I think it's tooling and teams. But I will say that I always like to take a problem first approach, which is what is the problem that we're trying to solve? Why are you even thinking about CDPs or implementing product analytics? Is it because you have a conversion rate from user to customer of like 2% and you're trying to optimize that, right? Or is it because you're trying to get more unique data into some platform, whether it be sales or marketing platform, like HubSpot, Iterable, you name it, to give a more customizable experience to people so that you improve conversion? There's so many problems that a CDP can solve. And I think it's really important to think about like, what is the problem? And that's actually, that first step is really hard because a lot of the time we hear these trends and we hear new tools and you say, oh, well, that makes sense. But what is the value? What can we actually get from it? And I think that's problem number one, or that's pain point number one. And the second pain point, which I think is very, very hard, is whenever you move data and involve so many different teams, like it becomes very difficult to corral people and to understand who are the different, like really break down who are the different stakeholders, how will they be using the tool, and what do they need to get from the tool, and how do you measure its success? And getting all those stakeholders together and agreeing and finding a tool that answers the problems of all of the different stakeholders is extremely difficult.
Yeah, so you did a great breakdown of what's out there, some of the differentiators between some of the tools people can use. And ultimately, like you said, it doesn't come down to the tooling, but asking the right questions for what your company needs. You say at the end, I'm going to give a direct quote, ultimately what matters is that the data is well-governed and understood. I would add to that maybe well-governed, understood, and used to its full potential. But that's because, you know, I work for a data activation company. I want to bring in a couple of people who chimed in. Hello to Ashley Rambo, who said, great conversation, Mary and Sarah. Hi, Ashley. And another person whose name I can't see. It must be one of your fans, Sarah, who said, this is getting back to your early question. We're talking about the macroeconomic and the budget constraint issues. This person said, budget and resource planning is often overlooked, but incredibly important as investors emphasize efficient growth. And again, we all know that's becoming more and more a part of the conversation. So thank you to whoever chimed in there. Also a shout out to, I had one other conversation on this show about product analytics. And I'm gonna go back and rewatch it now to see what was said differently. It was with Diana Shea from Correlated, who is also a terrific brain on product analytics. So I'll see if I can get maybe you two to do a face-off, or maybe you agree on everything. I wanna move on to what you're doing next. So now you're a free agent, but you're also building your own project, is my understanding. I kind of got that sense from a few tweets out there.
Yeah. So I would say that I am doing a variety of different things. So I would say first on the consulting side, I do consulting two different kinds. The first is the analytics side, right? 0 to 1,
Mm-hmm.
like how many users signed up yesterday? We are hacking some set of numbers together, and we need to get that right. So smaller companies, 0 to 1, let's set up like your minimum viable data stack, as I've called it before, and like where do we get started? The second is working with vendors specifically on content and go-to-market and product marketing. So who is the audience? Is it an analyst? Is it a data engineer? Is it a product person that you're trying to sell a data tool to because they don't have a data team? What message resonates? What are the problems they're trying to solve? And then how do we communicate? How do we communicate those problems and the value that a particular solution provides? My expertise is mostly in selling to, analytics teams, technical teams, data engineering teams, just because I was in that role for several years. Now, as you mentioned, I am working on something. Really, my whole MO is efficiency and doing anything and everything in the best way possible. And to me, I think something that we have seen a lot actually at Coalesce, which we talked about earlier, is what are the best practices? How do we function and, how do we work within analytics and bring in engineering best practices where it makes sense? And I think it doesn't have to stop there. And those best practices can be brought in even closer to the business. So if you think about version control, if you think about data observability, if you think about collaboration, those are all things that happen everywhere. Even when you talk about marketing, right? Marketing teams of one are in very small companies. Marketing teams are large, which means people are collaborating. They're also figuring out what version of campaigns and copy works, and there's iteration, and there has to be some sort of version control. It currently exists. And on the observability side, right? What does my data look like in my CRM? And a lot of the time that is really hard to figure out, especially when, right, we have tests on the data warehouse, but there's data in a CRM that comes directly from third-party tools. There are a lot of different integrations and data travels. Believe it or not, we talk about being inward-looking. There's data that lives outside of the warehouse that will never be in the warehouse because those aren't its users. And maybe it has a place in the warehouse, maybe it doesn't. But the point is there's a lot of data out there, and there are these concepts that I think could be very, very useful to RevOps folks, marketing folks, and sales folks. So really, this project is really about, is there a tooling opportunity? I believe there is, to enable people in specifically marketing, sales, and RevOps functions to be more productive, to be more efficient, and to have higher quality data, higher quality automations, to be able to automate more in a more scalable way. So that's kind of what I'll say there. And a good example is
something you're working on yourself or with the team. If you, whatever you can say, you don't have to reveal anything you're not ready to reveal.
Yeah, so I am working with one other person on this, but we're really kind of hacking away at, what we can do, just the two of us, and we'll see what comes out of it. And I will say that at the end of the day, in my career thus far, and I think in my career for as long as I'll be working, I'm always going to be striving for efficiency, always going to be trying to bridge the, creative side with the quantitative side. And that's kind of what I'm about.
A true data person. I love it. So a tool, vaguely, again, a tool in the RevOps space we should be looking out for, and one that by nature with RevOps has to embrace some of the chaos of all those things happening in data that doesn't necessarily make it into the warehouse and many of these different processes. Okay, so we will all be looking out for that, and hopefully something we can try out. Amazing. So I'm going to ask you the question that I hate asking, but I'll tell you why. One thing that bothers me in the data space, go onto LinkedIn. That's my main platform. I know there's a lot of places where people interact in the data community. Pretty much most posts in data engineering specifically, also more broadly in data, you make a comment, and like, I find for me, I'm the only woman in the space commenting. Or they'll make a list of top-notch data engineering influencers. I'm not one of those, you are, but often it's all males, right? What's it like to be one of the, big data engineering voices out there and to be one of the only women so far?
Yeah, I think so. For me, the way that I look at myself usually when I'm working is actually not as a woman in data. I look at myself as just a data professional. And I think that, we all have to be conscious of this. And so, for example, I'm going to, shed light on the conversation that we had before this pod, where you asked, hey, do you want to talk about this, or do you just want to talk about data? And I think that everyone, before asking these questions, some people just want to be people in the data world. I personally am very vocal about, working mothers, women in technical fields, people of color in technical fields, any minority in a field where there is a majority. But, I can speak to being a woman in a technical field, and I'm fairly vocal about that, where, we just have to be ourselves. It's really about embracing ourselves, and looking at the work that you produce as opposed to who you are. And the way that I like to approach that is, I'm a woman in a technical field, but the work that I produce is not reflective of me being a woman. It's just reflective of the work that I produce being a technical person. And any advice that I can give is, sure, skill set is important, but you can apply to a job, and either, your name will give away that you're a woman, or, an immigrant, or whatever it may be. But to me, relationships are key. There's always going to be someone who isn't willing to talk to you for whatever stupid reason. But figure out where the doors are, where those cracks are. And I always like to build relationships where people get to know me as a professional, as a human being. And I'm a woman. That's how I identify. That's me. But it's not, it's not something that is super forward in my professional life. And that's how I choose to be. And really just embrace that.
Love it. Love it. I was a fan before we spoke. I'm 10 times a fan of you now, Sarah. Thank you for all of that. I could talk to you longer. We didn't get through all the questions, but that's okay. Anything before we end? I know we're about at time, but if anything you wanted to mention that I didn't get to?
I don't think so. There's always so much to talk about, but I'm very passionate about data, about marketing, about the intersection of the two. I mean, you throw product analytics in there as well, but I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter. I read a newsletter, it's Sarah's newsletter at .substack.com. Please reach out. As I mentioned, I'm a relationships person and always like to talk to people. So.
I'll put it all in the comments and people can find you. And final shout out for every show, we make a $250 donation to the scholarship fund at Women in Data so that someday, hopefully in 5-10 years or even shorter than that, we no longer have to say Women in Data. We're just people who do data. So in appreciation for your time, we'll write that check in your name. So thank you so much, Sarah. We'll talk soon. And thanks to everybody for, who watched, who's at Coalesce too. I'm going to head back over to the showroom now. So, okay, take care.
Thanks so much. Take care.